I had always dreamed of marriage, but more than that, I dreamed of a child, someone small and bright like the boy on screen, who might one day call Jason Dad. The man in the interview held a child in his arms, a smile breaking through his carefully composed expression. He was implying, no, declaring, that he was unmarried, childless, but I knew better. I knew, because the man on the screen was no stranger. He was Jason Chen, my husband for 8 years. I remember the first time I saw him. Summer heat clung to my skin as I walked into our living room fresh from the dance studio, hair damp, clothes sticking, and there he was, sitting beside my father, his sponsor, wearing a shirt the color of a clear sky, calm, elegant, beautiful. He turned, his eyes met mine, and when he smiled, something in me gave way. We ended up at the same university. We fell together like two rivers merging. Jason treated me like something rare and fragile. He was attentive, generous, almost reverent. We married quietly, no fanfare, no white dress, just a courthouse and 2 signatures, as though we feared hesitation might steal what we had. After, my father helped him secure a position at one of Riverdale's top firms. For years, Jason worked in relative obscurity, until 1 month ago. That's when he won the Grace Monroe case. And everything changed overnight. He became a star in the legal world as his values soared. He started coming home less and less most of the time. The only place I saw him was on LinkedIn trending searches, always pictured with Grace and her son. My thoughts snapped back as I heard the front door code being entered, reeking of alcohol. Jason stumbled in, tossing his jacket carelessly onto the floor and collapsing onto the couch, eyes closed. I stood in the kitchen doorway holding a glass of warm water. His cold, detached attitude sent a wave of bitterness through my chest. After a moment, I walked over and handed him the water with a gentle tone. Jason, drink some water. He cracked one eye open and gave me a lazy smile. Why are you still up? He mumbled. He reached out and pulled me into his arms, planting a few sloppy kisses on my face. With a long sigh, he added, things have been crazy at the firm lately. I've been neglecting you. Let's go to the Maldives for your birthday next month, okay? I smiled faintly but didn't respond because my birthday was already last week. Then he grabbed my hand and went on talking to himself. Grace's case is wrapping up soon. You know, she's had it rough being a gorgeous actress in her prime and still having to deal with an abusive husband, but at least her son, Liam, is smart and adorable. If only we had a kid as cute as Liam. You don't know how close he is with me. If I remembered correctly, it had been almost 2 weeks since I last saw Jason, and now that he was finally home, all he could talk about was work, Grace, and her son. My eyes stared blankly off into the distance. Earlier this morning, I fainted at work. My assistant rushed me to the hospital, and after running a few tests, the doctor gave me a warm smile and said, congratulations, Miss Taylor, you're pregnant. The baby is developing well so far, but you really need to take better care of your mental health. I was genuinely happy when I heard the news. Jason and I had been married for 3 years and still hadn't been able to conceive. I had endured so much in the process, but now with the baby on the way, it finally felt worth it. I had been planning to share the news with Jason, excited and full of hope, but after seeing that interview and the way he acted when he got home, I didn't feel like saying a word. Maybe some things had already changed quietly and completely. The first time I met Grace Monroe in person was at an audition. Our company had recently acquired the rights to a wildly popular IP, and she had been invited to audition for the lead role. Just before the audition, the director, Luke, whispered to me, President Taylor, Grace's acting is pretty average, but with all the buzz from her divorce scandal, she's got massive name recognition. If we want a guaranteed box office hit, she's worth prioritizing. I didn't say anything. I stepped out into the hallway to take a phone call, but right after I hung up, Grace appeared behind me out of nowhere, arms crossed, red lips curled into a smug smile. She was the first to speak. So you're Jason's wife? I've seen your photos on his phone. I looked at her coldly. Yeah. And so what? Grace raised her brows in a carefree way and said smugly, he really lucked out, huh, marrying a rich girl like you. But it seems he's not that easily satisfied. He keeps showering me with affection. Sure, he's not rich, but he's handsome and smart's more than qualified to be Liam's dad. As Grace spoke, she reached out and lifted my chin with her fingertip, her smile turning sharper. Claire Taylor, do you really think he wouldn't divorce you? The moment I said the word, my hand clenched so tightly at my side I could hear my knuckles crack. Being taunted like that felt like a slap in the face. I gave a cold, sarcastic laugh and pushed her hand away, staring at her with disdain. Suit yourself, but you don't need to audition anymore today. Someone like you doesn't deserve to be the female lead in this film. Grace's expression froze, her brows furrowing tightly. You're just abusing your power. How petty can you be? I shrugged, completely unfazed. I never claimed to be generous, but let me give you a little advice. You're nothing more than a product built by capital, so don't throw a tantrum in front of it. If I were even a bit pettier, he'd be out of this industry for good. I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, Grace suddenly shouted angrily behind me, Claire Taylor, I have the kind of star power that can guarantee box office success. If you don't pick me, you'll regret it. I stopped, turned back and looked at her calmly. You really think too highly of yourself. Maybe you are a piece of gold, but the entertainment industry is full of gold. He wouldn't lose sleep over this time. I didn't even glance back as I left the hallway, leaving Grace standing there, her face twisted with fury. After the auditions ended, I drove back to the company. Ever since I started taking over parts of my family's business, I often felt both mentally and physically drained. Back in the day, Jason had always been gentle and attentive. He would go out of his way just to make me happy. Like the time I casually mentioned Eddie was craving candied chestnuts from the west side of the city, and he drove 2 hours through a snowstorm just to get them for me. Or when he learned how flowers could lift my mood and made it a point to bring me fresh bouquets every day despite his busy schedule. He always found Tomito cooked different meals for me each day. There were so many little things like that I never cared about money. What I valued was the care and devotion he had shown me for the past 8 years, but somehow that very same man had now become the biggest source of my stress. I parked the car and took the elevator straight to the executive office on the top floor. The moment the doors opened, my assistant hurried over. President Taylor, Mr. Chen is here. I froze mid-step and looked toward the office. Jason hadn't been to my company in 3 months. The last time he came, he was practically bursting with excitement, hugging me and saying, I just got assigned Grace Monroe's divorce case. She's been one of my favorite celebrities forever. I'm going to win this case for her. Since that day, he had stepped foot in my company again. He threw himself completely into Grace's case. I took a deep breath and slowly walked into my office. As I opened the door, Jason quickly stood up with a bright smile and walked toward me, pulling me into a hug. You're back. I was just about to discuss something with you. He gently pressed down on my shoulders, guiding me to sit on the couch, his face full of warmth. Jason poured me a glass of water and handed it over, his tone careful. I heard Grace came to audition for the new IP. Your company just took on that project's going to be huge. I paused my movement, suppressing the anger that was rapidly rising in my chest, and stared at him in silence. I already rejected her. She's not qualified to be in this film. If that's the reason you came here today, then you can get the hell out now. Jason's smile faded slightly and his voice turned impatient. Claire, she's just been through domestic abuse and betrayal. She finally got out of a toxic marriage. This is the time when she needs a good project to rebuild her image. Can't you show some empathy? My fingers tightened around the glass so hard they turned white. I stared at Jason, trying to figure out how he had changed so much in just a few months. These past few days, I'd been thinking a lot. We were finally expecting a child, and after 8 years of being together, those feelings weren't something that could be easily erased. That's why I was willing to give Jason a chance. I thought that once all this blew over, we could still try to live a good life together. But it was obvious Jason cared far more about Grace than he did about meth. Depth of his concern for her went far beyond anything he had shown toward me. I looked at the man I had loved for 8 years and my eyes couldn't help but read an empathy. You certainly have that, I said quietly, but it's built entirely on the foundation of ignoring me. I took a breath and looked him in the. Jason, I'm going to be very clear today. Grace's divorce case is over. There's no reason for the two of you to keep in such close contact. If you really can't let her go, then we should get a divorce. That way you can go take care of her and her son openly. Jason went pale. His mouth opened and closed several times, but not a single word came out. I swallowed hard, forcing back the tears that were threatening to spill, and stood up. My voice was calm, almost detached. I'm pregnant. What? He froze for a second, then suddenly jumped to his feet, staring at me in disbelief. Claire, why didn't you tell me sooner? I let out a bitter laugh and replied flatly, because back then you were with Grace and her son. You even told the press you weren't married. So tell me, Jason, how exactly was I supposed to tell you? With that, I pushed him aside and walked out of the office. Ever since he found out I was pregnant, Jason stayed by my side almost constantly, as if everything had gone back to the way it used to be. But I knew the truth. There was a growing distance between us, one that couldn't be undone. He still secretly followed news about Grace. More than once, Liam had called him, and even though Jason didn't answer because I was there, I could see the hesitation and longing in his eyes. He explained it like this: they're alone, Claire. That mother and child relied on me for everything before, but I won't let you down again. I won't let our baby down from now on. We'll be a proper family. I was born into a business family, the only daughter of wealthy parents. Ever since I was young, they instilled in me the importance of marrying someone with a compatible background, but all of that went Out the window when I met Jason, the emotions of a young girl had far outweighed reason. He took a gamble on us, and now it was clear he had bet wrong. It wasn't that I couldn't let go of Jason. What I couldn't let go were the feelings we'd shared over the past 8 years. Human hearts are made of flesh. I couldn't just cut ties and walk away like it was nothing. Still, divorce was no longer a question of if, but when. I had been planning to go on maternity leave soon and raise the baby on my own, but misfortune has a way of striking without warning. It started pouring the moment I got home, and I suddenly remembered I had left an urgent document at the office. I grabbed my keys and drove out into the rain. He hadn't gotten far when the accident happened. In that moment, my mind went completely blank. Pain shot through every part of my body before I passed out. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a hospital bed. The doctor stood beside me with a solemn expression. "Miss Taylor, I'm sorry we couldn't save the baby. You've suffered multiple fractures. Frankly, it's a miracle you survived. You'll need to remain bedridden for the next few months." Once the doctors left, I broke down. I couldn't control it anymore. The sobs came violently like a dam bursting. Misfortune always lurks in silence, waiting to strike when you're at your most unguarded. It took me a long time to pull myself together. With great effort, I reached for the phone beside the bed. My parents were still vacationing overseas, and I didn't want to worry them, so I decided to wait before saying anything. My fingers hovered over Jason's name. He was my husband. He should have been the one I needed most in this moment. But even as I was about to call him, I hesitated. The phone rang again and again. Just when I thought it would go to voicemail, a young child's voice. "Who is this?" It felt like 1,000 needles piercing straight through my chest. I couldn't even breathe. Then the child spoke again. "Mommy's sick, Daddy. Jason is making her some food." Before I could react, I heard Jason's voice in the background. It was faint, but I heard every word clearly. "Grace, I made some porridge. You and Liam should come eat." I hung up immediately. My hand trembled. I shut my eyes and the tears poured down like broken beads from a string. Jason didn't arrive at the hospital until the next day at noon. He rushed in, breathing heavily, face pale as he looked down at me lying in bed. Finally, with red-rimmed eyes, he took my hand and his voice was choked with emotion. "Claire, it must have hurt so much, but it was pouring yesterday. Why did you go out driving alone? We finally had a baby coming and now it's gone." Faced with his barrage of blame, all I felt was how absurd it all was. Jason didn't show an ounce of genuine concern for me. All his words, both between the lines and outright, were filled with nothing but accusation. I pulled my hand away from his and finally understood what it meant to feel completely dead inside. I turned to look out the window and slowly closed my eyes, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "Jason, just go. I don't want to see you anymore." As soon as I said it, I could clearly feel him freeze. "Claire, this is exactly when you need someone to take care of you. I know you're heartbroken. I am too. Get out," I shouted before he could finish. Maybe it was because I'd always been calm and rational from the moment we met. This sudden outburst startled Jason. He stood there stunned for a long time before he finally stood up. "I'll take leave from the firm. I'll stay here at the hospital to take care of you during this time. Claire, just focus on recovering for now." He leaned over to tuck in my blanket as he spoke, his eyes filled with a complicated mixture of emotions. When our eyes met in the air, I spoke with absolute calm. "Jason, let's get a divorce." The day I brought up divorce, Jason fled in a panic, but it didn't take long before he returned to the hospital room holding a pot of freshly made soup. Just as he said he would, he took a leave of absence and stayed with me, never leaving my side for a full 4 months. During that time, he didn't contact Grace at all. Even when Liam called, Jason would hang up without a second thought. My body slowly healed day by day, but between the two of us, barely a word was spoken. It was like a cold war with no end in sight. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, my parents came to pick me up. My mom held me tightly, sobbing nonstop. "My poor girl, you were so seriously injured and didn't even tell us. Thank God for little Croc. If he hadn't been here, who would have taken care of you?" I didn't say anything. I struggled to get into the car. Just as I was closing the door, Jason grabbed the handle and looked up at me. "Claire, come home with me. Your parents are getting older. It's hard for them to take care of you." I looked at him calmly. After everything we'd been through, my heart had already gone still. "The house and the car were gifts from my parents before we got married. Since we're getting divorced, I need you to start packing and move out soon. You're a divorce lawyer. You don't need me to explain the details." At that, Jason's knuckles went white from gripping the car door, his face slowly going stiff. "What happened before was my fault. I crossed boundaries I shouldn't have, but it's been months now. Are you still that angry? I know you're just mad. Come home with me and let's talk this out." Before I could even respond, my dad had already figured out what was going on. He walked over and patted Jason on the shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "I don't know exactly what happened between you two, but Claire has been committed to you since 8 years ago. I've seen everything, the love, the effort. If there's a problem, it should be resolved, but if she no longer wants to continue, then you can't force Heronly. Then did Jason finally release the door handle, clearly reluctant but with no choice. He took a deep breath and looked at me. Claire, after the new year it'll be 9 years since we got together. I'll wait for the day you're not angry anymore. Back at the old family home, my parents didn't ask many questions. They could see it just as clearly. Whatever Jason and I once had was already over during the time I stayed there. Jason would visit often, but I didn't want to see him. One evening, I had just returned from the office when I heard laughter coming from the living room. I walked in and saw that besides my parents, there was also a man in the living room, elegant and refined, with a naturally dignified appearance and cool demeanor. When he heard me come in, he slowly turned his head toward me and smiled. "Claire, you're back." I looked at him, startled for a moment. "Lucas." He stood up and walked toward me with long, steady strides. In the next second, the crisp scent of his cologne surrounded me as he pulled me into a hug. "It's been a while, Claire." It had been 3 years since I last saw Lucas. He had grown up next door, my childhood neighbor and the classic golden boy everyone admired back then. People always talked about him as the kind of son other families could only dream of. I used to joke that when I grew up I would marry Lucas and be his bride. Both our families would laugh every time I said it, secretly hoping the joke might one day come true. But eventually I met Jason and we got together. Lucas had been there the day our marriage was announced. That was the first and only time I saw him drunk. Normally polite and well-mannered, he had reeked of alcohol as he looked at me and asked, "Claire, are you really happy marrying him?" Back then I was still completely blinded by Jason's love. I smiled and told Lucas I love him very much. Being able to marry him makes me happy. I hope you find happiness too. Lucas didn't respond. He forced a smile and looked at me for a long time. Shortly after that, he left the country to pursue further studies and he was gone for 3 years. The day I picked up the finalized divorce agreement Jason had helped draft, I went to his law firm. As I was stepping out of the elevator, Lucas messaged me asking where I was and if I wanted to get dinner together. I sent him my location. The moment I looked up, I saw Jason. He was walking out of a meeting room with a group of colleagues. When he saw me, his eyes lit up instantly. He quickly walked over and tried to take my hand. In his usual affectionate manner, I instinctively took a step back. One of his colleagues teased with a gossiping tone, "Jason, is this your wife? She's stunning. I feel like I've seen her somewhere before." Jason beamed with pride, wrapping his arm around my shoulders and pulling me close. "Let me introduce you. This is my wife, Claire Taylor. If she looks familiar, it's probably because she's the daughter of the well-known entrepreneur Richard Taylor." The mention of my identity left his co-workers visibly stunned. After all, Jason had started from nothing, an orphan who'd climbed his way to success, and now he had a wealthy high society wife. They immediately started chiming in with laughter and nudges. "Come on, Jason. This calls for a dinner treat, right, Mrs. Chen?" I kept a cold expression the entire time and said nothing. Jason tightened his grip on my shoulder and leaned in. "Claire, I knew you wouldn't stay mad at me forever. I'm really happy you came to see me. Have dinner with me and my co-workers tonight. I've been wanting to introduce you to them." I looked at him without emotion and calmly lifted his arm from my shoulder. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out the divorce agreement he'd prepared in advance and tossed it in his face. "No need. I'm not here for dinner. I'm here to deliver our divorce papers." I turned to his stunned co-workers and smiled. "This firm is owned by my uncle. If you'd like to host your next gathering at Silver Hall, just give my name. It's on me." That wasn't just an invitation, it was a reminder. Jason only got into this prestigious firm because of Maya's career had been built on my family's connections. After saying that, I looked back at Jason, who was still frozen in place, and added coldly, "I hope you sign it soon." Jason called my name in a whisper, eyes red with disbelief. He didn't understand. He thought that after all our years together, after everything he had done for me these past few months, even if he'd never technically cheated, I would eventually forgive him. But Jason never truly understood me. Once love turns cold, there's no going back. No one would have ever imagined that the famous divorce lawyer would one day be the one getting divorced. On my way downstairs, Lucas messaged me saying he'd arrived and was waiting at the curb. Sure enough, the moment I stepped out of the building, I spotted Lucas right away, dressed in a long black overcoat, one hand casually tucked into his pocket, leaning against a sleek high-end Bentley worth over $1 million. Passers-by couldn't help but stare at him, drawn by his striking looks, unattainable air and the sheer presence of that luxury car. He wasn't even looking at his phone. His expression had been indifferent at first, but the moment he saw me, his lips curved into a smile as he walked toward me. "I'd been waiting a while," he said. I noticed his cheeks were flushed red from the cold. "Why didn't you wait in the car?" I asked, feeling a little guilty. Lucas didn't answer right away. He reached out and tightened my scarf gently around my neck. "I just got here. I was worried you might not see me come out." So I stayed outside. I was about to respond when Jason's voice suddenly cut through the air behind me. Claire Taylor. He shouted furiously as he stormed toward Lucas and me, his brows furrowed tight as he scrutinized us. Who is he? Jason had never met Lucas before. Compared to Jason's frantic, unhinged demeanor, Lucas remained composed and calm with an almost lazy expression. He glanced at Jason and smirked. You really don't want to know who I am? That line, spoken so carelessly, was enough to invite misunderstanding from anyone. Jason was no exception. He looked at me in shock. So you're divorcing me because of him? I let out a long breath, tired of arguing. If you're allowed to care about someone else, then so am I. So sign the damn papers. Jason burst into loud laughter as if he'd heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. I don't believe it. You love me too much. You're just throwing a tantrum. Claire, I'd rather die than divorce you. I stared at him blankly. You're insane with that. I grabbed Lucas's hand and turned to leave. Lucas seemed a little off that day during dinner. He kept staring at his left hand, lost in thought. I found it funny and teased. What are you staring at? Your hand? Because I held it earlier. Yeah, just that one word almost made me choke on the piece of steak I just swallowed. I coughed several times, my face instantly burning red. Lucas chuckled and handed me a glass of water. Careful, don't choke. I took the glass and drank it all in one go, trying to hide how awkward I felt after that. I asked him about his life abroad in 2 words, utterly boring aside from work. He barely did anything else. If it were anyone else, I would have thought they were lying, but coming from Lucas, it felt entirely believable. He had always been like this, emotionally steadied to the point of being cold. He wasn't social and rarely got close to people other than me, who clung to him as a kid. I'd never seen him hang out with friends. Lucas was handsome, came from a good family and had plenty of admirers, but he was like a flower on a high mountain, untouchable. No one had ever plucked him. Are you really divorcing him? Lucas asked suddenly, without even looking up at me. Put down my utensils and gave a melancholy smile. Yeah. I lost the beta. Nodded slightly, seeming to understand. Then he set down his utensils, too. When he looked at me again, his eyes were softer than before, filled with quiet warmth. Claire, this is just a small mistake in the grand scheme of your life. It's nothing. I'm really glad you had the courage to let go, he said, raising his glass with a deeper smile. To you, the brave girl. I paused, then raised my own glass and smiled back. To me and the freedom that's finally mine. It had been a long time since I drank. A few glasses in, I was already tipsy and flushed. Since marrying Jason, I'd been extremely careful with my health, always thinking that if the timing was right, I could get pregnant. During those 3 years, I had barely touched alcohol. After dinner, I was so drunk, my whole body felt like jelly. Lucas's eyes flickered with something soft as he looked at me. His lips curled into a small, quiet smile. He walked over, crouched down in front of me, gently slipped his coat around my shoulders. You're drunk, he said softly. Let me take you home. After making sure I was bundled up and warm, he suddenly picked me up bridal style and carried me out the door. The driver was already waiting by the car. Lucas carried me into the back seat. The moment the car pulled away, I started sobbing softly. For someone usually so composed, he suddenly looked completely flustered. Lucas stared at me, unsure of what to do. He looked like he wanted to pull me into his arms but hesitated, probably worried I'd think he was crossing a line. In the end, all he could do was gently wipe my tears. His eyes filled with pain for me, but my tears wouldn't stop. They kept falling uncontrollably. Through the tears, I asked him, Lucas, have you ever really loved someone? Have you ever known what it's like to give your heart to someone only to be betrayed in return? I thought Jason and I would have a happy ending, but reality slapped me in the face. It wasn't about Jason having feelings for Grace. That wasn't why I was crying. I cried because I had wasted 8 years of love on the wrong person. The car was dimly lit. Lucas's hand, which had been wiping away my tears, paused for a moment. His eyes turned shadowed and unreadable. Finally, he gave a bitter smile. Claire, are you really not able to let him, given though all he's done is make you cry? Before I could say anything, Lucas cut the back of my head with one hand and pressed the other to my waist, pulling me into his arms. His scent, tinged with wine and a faint fresh sharpness, enveloped me instantly. I froze, eyes wide in shock. Lucas was kissing me. The kiss started light, but quickly deepened. I struggled to breathe under its intensity. My hands hovered awkwardly against his chest before I slowly closed my eyes. In the silence of the car, the heat between us seemed to grow unchecked. Lucas kissed me harder, almost desperately, not giving me a chance to catch my breath. It wasn't until the air in my lungs began to thaw that he finally let go and I collapsed breathless into his arms. It took me a while to fully process what had just happened. By then, I was half sober. The car had somehow already arrived in front of my house. Without a word, I turned to open the door, trying to escape the awkwardness, but in the next second, Lucas reached out and pulled me back. I fell straight into his arms while I was still dazed. He kissed me again, but this time the kiss was gentler, heartbreakingly so in a haze. I felt Lucas lower his head onto my shoulder and whisper, "I'm sorry, Claire, I'm really about to lose my Mindy, love you. Only you, if I had known he'd hurt you like this I would have stayed 3 years ago no matter what it took. I hate myself for being so reserved, for being such a coward." And as he said those words, I felt 2 warm tears fall onto my shoulder. Lucas was crying from that day on. Everything between Lucas and me became complicated. I had never imagined he'd feel this way about me. In my eyes, he had always been someone calm, distant, and impeccably polite. I forgot that no matter how composed someone appears, if they're human, they have feelings. Someone knocked on my office door. My assistant stepped in looking awkward. "President Taylor, Mr. Raskation is downstairs asking to see you." I tried stopping him, but he's been making a scene. I looked up and nodded calmly. "Let him come up." When Jason walked into the office, I was reprinting the divorce papers he had prepared last time and placing them neatly on my desk. He looked thinner than before, his face worn and tired. The confidence he once had was completely gone. "Claire," he said softly, his eyes filled with longing. I ignored it and pointed at the papers on the table. "Jason, there's no point in dragging this out. Sign the divorce agreement." "No," he said, shaking his head firmly. His eyes were red. "I don't believe you've really fallen for someone else. We've been together nearly 9 years. How could that compare to someone you've only just reconnected with?" "I was wrong before I crossed the line with Grace. I know that, but nothing ever happened between us. I swear there was never anything inappropriate." I let out a soft laugh and lowered my head. "So what, Jason? Cheating only counts if you get caught in bed. You missed our wedding anniversary, my birthday. You were with Grace and Herson the night I almost died in that car crash. We've been together 8 years and yet you instinctively denied me to a reporter. Jason, isn't all this enough reason for a divorce?" I stared him down. "You're a professional divorce attorney. Have you ever seen a couple with 0 problems decide to split up just for fun?" My voice was sharp, and as my questions cut through the silence I saw the color drain from his face. I looked up at him, my gaze as cold and fractured as shattered ice. "He's not someone new. I've known Lucas for over 20 years. He's my childhood friend." "Yuri, the one who came after Jason?" Froze for a moment, then let out a self-deprecating laugh. "Yuri, right, a woman like you choosing someone like me. That was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me." He looked down, voice thick with bitterness. "Back then when your father didn't approve, I knelt in the snow all night just to get him to say yes." As he spoke, he suddenly dropped to his knees again in front of me and forced a pained smile. "So now I'm kneeling again, begging for your forgiveness. I can't live without you." I looked down at him and all I felt was how pathetic it had become. "Jason, now I realize me father and I were both wrong about you. He didn't spend all that money supporting your education just because he felt sorry for you. He did it because he believed in your potential. But you have no spine." I grabbed the divorce papers from the table and handed them to him along with a pen. "I won't waver. I'm not looking back 8 years. I'll just consider it a gift to you." Maybe it was my indifference that finally got through to him, or maybe he finally realized I would never give him another chance. In the end, he signed, and just like that, it was over. The divorce wasn't as painful as I'd imagined. In fact, it felt like an enormous weight had been lifted off my chest. Jason said he would move out soon, and he even handed back the car keys. Before I knew it, it was already the eve of Lunar New Year. Winter and Riverdale was as cold as ever, though snow still hadn't fallen that night. I finished work late. It was almost 11 p.m. The office was dark and empty. I stretched, shut down my computer and got ready to leave, but as soon as I stepped outside I realized snow had started falling without me noticing. Flakes drifted gently down, covering everything around in a soft white hush. When I snapped out of the moment, I saw Lucas standing by the curb, just like last time, leaning quietly against the car, waiting for me. But this time I knew he had been waiting for a long while because a thin layer of snow had already formed on his shoulders. I walked over and before he could speak, I smiled and teased, "Are you planning to confess to me just because it's snowing?" Lucas nodded. "Would you be willing to give me that chance?" I've always been the type to speak my mind. Believe that hiding your feelings only leads to misunderstandings. With Lucas, I didn't want to hide anything. After getting in the car, he drove us toward the outskirts of the city. The roads were nearly empty. 2 hours later, the car stopped in front of a hillside villa. This place sat on top of a mountain at the edge of Riverdale. It was a gift from Lucas's grandfather on his 18th birthday. In fact, the entire mountain belonged to his family. As I stepped out of the car, I felt a strange mix of emotions: excited, nervous, and a little overwhelmed. I had only been joking when I made that comment earlier. I didn't expect Lucas to take it seriously. He came over holding a fuzzy teddy bear hat and without a word, gently placed it on my head. When he was done, he smiled softly. "It's cute." The moment I saw it, I knew it would suit you. I laughed a little smug. "Well, obviously, look who's wearing it." Lucas raised a hand and affectionately brushed the bridge of my nose with his knuckle. "Claire, I mean it. He took my hand and led me to a nearby observation deck. Even though the mountain was privately owned, it was a known spot for enjoying the city's nightscape. People often came to admire the twinkling lights off Riverdale from up high, but now deep into the night, there was no one else around, just me and Lucas. The snow-covered ground was slippery and Lucas held my hand carefully the entire way. When we finally reached the viewing platform, the city stretched out beneath Yuzel as if surrendering quietly at our feet. Many buildings had already turned off their lights, but the skyline still shimmered beautifully. Lucas looked down at me, eyes warm and full of depth, like a clear spring welling from within. Claire, he said softly, I've never confessed my feelings to anyone before. I've never fallen for anyone else either. Lucas said, since we were kids, I've always liked you, my little shadow. It was my hesitation that made me miss so many chances, but now I want to be brave for once. If you're not ready, I'll wait. A snowflake drifted down and landed on the knot of his scarf. Lucas was visibly trembling, just slightly, but clearly from nerves, though he didn't even notice. I had always had this quiet admiration for him growing up, and now this man I once thought was so out of reach was nervously baring his heart to me under the softly falling snow. The night air was cold, but something about it all felt perfect. When I didn't answer right away, I saw the calm in his eyes begin to unravel. He started to panic, and just before I could say anything, boom! A firework burst in the sky right in front of us. Startled, I turned toward the base of the mountain. More fireworks exploded across the night, lighting up my cheeks in brilliant color. With one loud crack, the entire sky filled with vibrant bursts of light, and then slowly the fireworks came together to form the initials of my name. I blinked in stunned silence. Seriously, he really went all out with this straight guy romance playbook? It wasn't until the last firework faded then I turned back to Lucas. The wind swept strands of hair across my face. I took a deep breath and smiled. Lucas, let's give it a try. He looked dazed for a second, like he couldn't believe what he just heard. Then he laughed and pulled me into his arms. Been waiting so long to hear you say that. I leaned into him, smiling without restraint. The joy I felt was impossible to hide. Lucas lowered his head and kissed me, but not before tugging the little bear hat down slightly to cover my eyes. I had a feeling his eyes were red again. So even the man everyone called untouchable was just a soft-hearted romantic underneath Lucas, and I fell into a whirlwind romance almost immediately. We were inseparable. One morning he had just set a bowl of freshly made goldfish-shaped wontons in front of me when I got a call from building management. Miss Taylor. The property manager's voice was panicked. Mr. Chen is passed out drunk in his apartment. The door was left wide open. You'd better come check on him. I let out a deep sigh and hung up. I'll go with you, Lucas offered, already reaching for the car keys by the front door. Still dressed in his loungewear when we pulled up to Jason's building, Lucas gave me a few worried glances but didn't press. Still, he asked, do you want me to go up with you? We had just started dating and I knew seeing Jason like that would probably make Lucas uncomfortable. I didn't want things to get tense, especially since emotions between exes and new partners could easily spark conflict. I shook my head. No need, just wait here, I'll be right back. As I opened the door to step out, Lucas quickly reached out and grabbed my wrist. His gaze was deep and full of worry. I smiled and leaned in to kiss him lightly. I'll be back in a few minutes, I promise. He nodded and softly rubbed the back of my hand with his thumb. I'll wait here to go home with you. As soon as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw the wide-open apartment door. The moment I got closer, the strong stench of alcohol hit me like a wave. The building manager saw me and practically rushed over like he'd spotted a savior. Miss Taylor, thank God. I was afraid something happened to your ex. I've been standing guard the whole time. I nodded, understanding. Then I looked up and saw Jason laying in a heap on the living room floor, completely wasted. This apartment I had already planned to sell it. Jason and I were divorced, so I told the manager, from now on, if he tries to enter the building again, don't let him. He no longer lives here. The manager nodded firmly and left. I forced myself to stay calm as I stepped inside and closed the door behind. Meth noise must have stirred Jason because he looked up at me, face pale, eyes glassy, reeking of alcohol. He grinned weakly. Your back. Empty bottles were everywhere. Judging from the mess, he hadn't just started drinking tonight. He had probably been doing this for days. He sighed. Jason, haven't you moved your stuff out yet? He froze where he stood, the smile slowly vanishing from his face. This was our home. Where am I supposed to go? Jason muttered, feigning confusion like he didn't understand what was happening. I was running out of patience. We're already divorced. I've listed this place with an agent. You need to move out soon. His eyes were vacant and tears started to fall. He stood not far from me, clutching his face in both hands, choking back sobs. This is my home. I have nowhere else to go. Suddenly, a memory surfaced off when we first moved in after getting married. Jason had cried back then, to hunt me and sobbed like a child, saying, Claire, I've never had family before. I've never had a home. From now on, you're my family. This is my home. For someone Like Jason, who grew up an orphan, what he had gained, this apartment, a sense of belonging, was something most people might never have in their lifetime, but he had taken a winning hand and thrown it all away. Everything that happened now, he brought on himself. I looked at him and felt nothing, not sadness, not anger, just a dull emptiness. All I could think about was Lucas, who was still waiting downstairs. Do what you want, I said flatly, but once this place is sold, you'll have no choice but to leave. I turned to go, but the next moment I heard the sharp, unmistakable sound of glass shattering. I froze and whipped around. Jason had smashed a bottle on the floor. He grabbed a jagged shard and pressed it to his own neck. His hand was already bleeding. Dark red blood dripped from his wrist, pooling on the floor. He looked up at me, tears brimming in his eyes, and smiled a broken, despairing smile. Claire, I know I was wrong. I didn't treasure the love we had. Let it slip away. Your love made me forget who I really was. I love you. I can't live without you. If I lose you, I'll die. As he said that, pushed the shard deeper into his skin. Blood immediately welled up on his neck. I stood still, expressionless, watching him from across the room. Jason collapsed to his knees, wailing. His sobs were raw, guttural. I don't know what to do to win you back, but these past few weeks without you, they've been hell. I feel like I'm already dead. The thought of living like this for the rest of my life, God, I'd rather die right now. He looked up at me again, his face soaked in tears. Please, Claire, for the sake of those 8 years, give me one more chance. Let me spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I let out a quiet laugh and slowly shook my head. It's too late. I am with Lucas now. And just like that, the last thread holding Jason together snapped. His one remaining shred of hope crumbled. He sank helplessly to the floor, his voice barely audible. So you really threw away what we had? Just like that, 8 whole years? I raised an eyebrow, looking down at him with complete contempt. Jason, you're the one who gave up first, and besides, we're divorced. What am I supposed to wear mourning clothes for 3 years before I'm allowed to move on? Don't be ridiculous. I glanced at my watch. I'd been upstairs too long. I shot him one final look and said coldly, if you want to die, go ahead, just don't do it in my apartment. Then I turned around and walked out, not sparing a single glance at his pale face or the tears still falling from his eyes. The moment I stepped out, I saw Lucas waiting in the hallway. This time, unlike his usual quiet calm, his whole body radiated nervous tension. He heard the door and whipped his head toward me. Without a word, he rushed over and pulled me into his arms. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the way he exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath until that moment. I smiled and patted his back. It's okay. I always thought I was a pretty composed guy, he said against my shoulder, but the thought of you being alone with him, just I couldn't sit still. I had to come up. Turns out the flower on the mountaintop wasn't just a crybaby. He was kind of a hothead, too. Thinking that, I couldn't help but laugh. Then I rose up on my toes and planted a kiss on Lucas's lips, my voice soft and playful. I am hungry. Can you make me a bowl of those little goldfish wontons when we get home? Lucas lowered his gaze to look at me, his eyes overflowing with tenderness. Of course, I'll make them for you for the rest of my life if you want this. I had resolutely let go of an 8-year relationship. It was like pulling out a poison thorn that had been buried in my heart for far too long. Maybe most people didn't have the courage to rip that thorn out, but I've always believed that what's lost will eventually return in a different form. So long as you're brave enough to start over, even in suffering, something beautiful will bloom again. The most important thing we can do is to live for ourselves at that moment. The snow was falling heavily, but once this winter passes, it will be a brand new spring. The end.